All right. Well, welcome everybody to Kitchen Table Conversations with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, which is a program of men as peacemakers, where together we are shaping new meanings of masculinity that are authentic, caring, and thoughtful. These conversations help us see the dignity of those around us. It helps us practice collective care as well as self care and responsibility towards others. And we get to learn how to do it in a way that acknowledges that we are all human beings who are whole. And yeah, excited to be here. My name is Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And yeah, excited to get into it today. So, as a reminder, for those of you who may be new here, each month we choose a topic that can help men and masculine people identify our own roles in creating safe and thriving communities that are free of violence. And we host two discussions during the month about that topic. So, the first conversation focuses on us learning and developing a deeper understanding of the issue at hand. And then during the second conversation of the month, we talk about how we practice this. What are the tangible ways that men and masked folks in our community can work alongside others to create the change that we need to see within our communities? So, just a reminder, these conversations are a way for us to come together to learn new things, usually from different perspectives, as well as it shows us how we can all have these important conversations with the people in our own lives.
So we're very helpful to join all of you guys. As you guys know, in our last conversation, we were lucky enough to have the privilege to talk to Sean Elmquist about the concept called the mutual sexual respect. As you guys know, Sean Elmquist is a campus prevention coordinator at Men as Peacemaker, or MAP, and it's responsible for the development and facilitation of MAP innovative programming to prevent sexual violence in college campuses. But before we start for today's conversation, let's take a minute for each of us to introduce ourselves. And I'll start myself. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are him, he, him, and his, or él in Spanish. And I'm currently in Egan. Actually, I'm currently today in St. Paul in our main offices in Esperanza United in Minnesota. So I'm super happy to be here. So I'll open the space for you guys to introduce themselves. Especially we have a new friend joining us. So go ahead.
And again, my name is Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm coming to you from Duluth, Minnesota at Men as Peacemakers.
Hello, I'm the new guy. My name is Nick Heck, like what the heck, which is lovely in Minnesota to have as a last name. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a youth support staff at MAP, specifically within our mega program, Make Equal Genders Awesome. And I love it.
Awesome. Yeah, we're super glad to have you joining us, Nick. And then, yeah, you may see some new faces in the future as we're welcoming in some new folks. We always, again, love to bring in new and different perspectives. So, yeah, let's hop into it. So, again, as Felix mentioned, last time we chatted with Sean Elmquist, the other Sean at Men as Peacemakers. He was the first Sean. I got to give him credit for that. And we had a conversation about mutual sexual respect, which is sort of a concept that takes consent to the next level. And so today we're focusing on what does it look like for men and masculine folks within our communities to really practice this mutual sexual respect concept in our own relationships. And so I'm really curious about where this conversation will go. And so, for those who may not know, one of the main purposes of the Men and Masculine Folks Network is to help us understand and recognize the important role that each of us play within our communities to prevent harm and violence, and also the roles that we play to create safe and thriving spaces within our communities. And we know that everyone has influence in some way, so we as men folk can really use our influence, gifts, and skills to change the community conditions that allow this violence to thrive currently. So yeah, let's get into the practical with one of our first questions here. So thinking about the future, what do you think, so guys, what do you think our future communities will look like when mutual sexual respect is being taught as well as practiced? And I'll just open it up.
Thank you, Sean, for your question. Wow, that's a very interesting question, specifically because now that I understand the concept, I'm I feel I don't know if I could say I feel sorry, I feel bad that I never had the opportunity to have this conversation before, especially specifically when I was growing up, when I was in the teens, uh, to have a better understanding of the importance of the mutual sexual respect or consent, and how this could easy, a lot of the issues that a lot of the youth is going through, specifically for me because I can see it as something that not only helped me as a person and in my relationship, but also relating to other people, at work, having a better understanding of, have limits and barriers, and when to have a healthy boundaries in relationships. Uh, my parents barely, maybe, or never talked to me about that. So a lot of those, all those concepts, I probably never thought about them, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I have that opportunity to learn about them, and it made me realize the importance of having this conversation with the youth to provide them the opportunity for them to create a safe space where they can be their through themselves, where they don't need to live with a mask or listen to those expectations that they're not very healthy, specifically when we think about relationships, when we think about the importance of when you have a partner, that person also have feelings, that person also need to have boundaries, that maybe for us they could be a little bit like, whoa, I thought you loved me, why are you putting boundaries in a relationship, without realizing that there is a necessity for them to be them, so we can be our true selves, so we can be sure that that person that is with you is learning at the same pace that you're learning, specifically when you're young and you're exploring sexuality and when you're exploring relationships, specifically when maybe you didn't have those best examples at home, about what's a healthy relationship, specifically if you grew up in a place where there was a lot of violence or there's a lot of arguments in the house, and now we have this opportunity when we explore this concept to be able to create those spaces where everybody could be the best version of themselves, but they can understand, have a better understanding of the importance of a healthy relationship, of that these boundaries are healthy, and how they can help you to be your true selves. Something that I grew up with a mask. I grew up trying to follow those expectations of in the society expected of Latino men. That at the same time, now as an adult, I realize how harmful they are. And from our conversation last week with Sean, he helped me have a better understanding how to probably apply it in a way that's more helpful to other people to understand, and to people understand the importance of creating those boundaries and that mutual sexual respect. Specifically for me, father of two daughters, that I want to be sure that when my daughters are out there, they have a better understanding, and also advocate for people to have this type of conversation, but at the same time to be there when they see it, and lift their voices when needed. So yeah, so I don't know. It's not a complex concept, but when you have never used or never applied before, it's a challenge because you're challenging those stereotypes and those expectations of society. So it's fun to talk about it, but at the same time, we need to be sure that it's not just leave it there in those conversations, but we also need to apply them in our lives.
Thank you, Felix. I thought that was a really good response, and it got me from where I was thinking about how I would respond to thinking more about and reflecting on family. Because thinking about this topic, the first thing my mind went to is like, where did I learn mutual sexual respect? It's like thinking about my parents, you kind of have them as role models to what a relationship looks like, whether you know it's healthy or you're not cognizant of if it's unhealthy. And then thinking, it's like, was it a lesson in health class in high school? It's like, no. And so I feel like it really is just something that you pick up and you grow with. And so going back to the question of what do we think future communities will look like when this is taught and practiced, is like I feel people who whoever's in these relationships will be more informed. And that's just something that thinking about it now as we've gone through our own life experiences and me personally now getting to like work with this stuff and having conversations where you start to learn perspectives, I think it's just something where I hope having these conversations will make the topic less uncomfortable. Because if I were to, let's say, if I was in high school back whenever and asked my parents, like, Mom, Dad, what's mutual sexual respect? They probably would be like, go talk to somebody else. Just because there's a barrier to having like a very serious conversation with the relationship that you have close enough, like having parents or something. So for me, I think it hopefully erases whatever taboo uncomfortableness that comes with talking about mutual sexual respect, because the whole idea of establishing boundaries and figuring out what your boundaries are is talking about it. And so that's my hope for the future, is that keeps families together, keeps relationships together, because they have that mutual sexual respect by having those conversations.
Yeah, I really like that, Nick. Because I was thinking about too, it's like so much of this is about communication and how like do we know how to communicate about these things at all? Like do we know, like when I think about the future, I think people, hopefully future generations, will be able to communicate about what their needs are, what their desires are. They'll have that sort of awareness and understanding because it won't be like this taboo, stigmatized conversation. Like we can actually have youth growing up and like they will have bodily autonomy. They will know what that means. Then they'll be able to actually then, yeah, engage in new ways where hopefully, like joy and pleasure are at the forefront of how this works in the future. And I totally agree about, I hope that, sorry, my computer just did some weird thing. So I don't know if I'm getting kicked off. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you and see you. At least I can.
Awesome. All right, I need to talk to someone about this tech issue. But I lost my train of thought a little bit there. But yeah, I hope that in the future there will be less stigma, less sort of judgment and like morality that kind of comes into these conversations, where it can actually just be about those people who are being intimate. They'll be able to know what they want. They'll also be able to listen and like be open, and maybe curious about their partner or partners, plural, and just, yeah, being comfortable to say, hey, I don't like that, or let's try this new thing, or yeah, it sounds really cool. Because I, too, like personally, it's like, yeah, this is always a little uncomfortable to talk about. For me personally, growing up, like I grew up in a super conservative religious home. So, like, I got pulled out on sex education days at school. And also, as a trans guy, for most of my youth growing up, like, I was socialized female. And so I have like sort of this unique view into, as a girl, young girls and young women and femme folks. It's like there's a very different conversation happening about how we show up, or how femme folks show up. And then now translating that to a more masculine version, it's like, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a gender, the word I'm trying to use is the F bomb, and I don't need to throw that in there. But, anyways, yeah, just this concept of like, what we teach young kids who are more femme and more masculine, and how actually, like, could those be like combined? Could we be learning about each other rather than like so separate and so isolated?
Thank you, Sean. Absolutely. And just like the first question, how we visualize this and the impact, in our lives, when you could be yourself, when you can be with someone and knowing that you're safe, that you're in a relationship with the person that you're with is listening to you. When I say listening to you, is really listening to you. So it's a healthy relationship. I think it's something that every person deserves, and we shouldn't be scared of having these conversations, even when, like in my case, my parents never had it with me, and now when I'm having it with my daughters, even that, like Sean said, it could be a little bit difficult, but once you open the space and you're able to talk to your kids, or your nephews, or any friends or family members, you know that you're making a difference and you're creating change. You're providing that opportunity that you maybe didn't have, but for future generations to have, and break that taboo topic. So, to follow up with this conversation, I want to ask you guys something, and I can probably start answering myself. I'll open the space for you guys, but the question that I have right now is: what are some ways, they could be big, they could be small, that men can take right now to start working towards that future, of having this conversation about mutual sexual respect? So again, big or small ways that men can take right now to start working towards that future. So you guys want to jump in? You want me to jump in?
I I can answer that.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Nick. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, thank you. Um, to me, obviously, being invited to these conversations is something I like to reflect on in my own life. Like, how have I shown mutual sexual respect? And I think things that may be small, and I was kind of reading about it, is just practicing consent like every day. Consent doesn't necessarily need to always be something sexual. It could be something as much as like going, I don't know, going to get your hair cut, and then kind of like saying, this is what I want, and then maybe your barber's like, oh, I got this idea, let's go with this and change it up. And losing consent in those sorts of ways, just like conversations you have with people during your day, or different things where you could potentially be broaching in on people's personal bubbles, whether it's physically or emotionally, mentally, um, whatnot. So I feel like just practicing consent every day, being reflective about some of the decisions you made, being reflective on the things in the past, maybe different relationships, whether they're sexual or not, where you felt like you had just in general mutual respect. Um, I think is something too. I had something else. I totally forgot.
Well, if it comes back, pop back in. Um, Yeah, I really like how you were saying that, like in the everyday. I think about my kiddo who is 5, and from a very young age, it was important for us to teach her about, her own bodily autonomy, and things like, you don't have to give grandma a kiss and a hug if you don't want to. And so just we've really tried to normalize that with her, and to this day, like if she's having a hard time and she's, having big feelings, I'll just say something like, would you like a hug? And most of the time, this kid says no. She's not a really huggy kid. But, just that practice of asking the question, like, hey, is it okay if I take a bite of your food? Or, hey, is it okay if I hold your hand right now? Or, like things like that. So just the practice of asking and communicating every day about I mean, yeah, because this concept, it's like if you take the sexual part out, it's like we're trying to practice mutual respect in all of the areas of our lives, right? And within communities and in those spheres that we occupy within communities. And so, the other thing I was thinking about is, just like practicing, specifically like when it comes to being intimate or sexual with like a partner, it's like, again, if we as men and mask folks can be a little bit more open and like get clear on what are the things that make us feel good, what are the things we want from a partner, and then it's like, then we can practice saying those things, like literally saying them out loud. And like when we say practice, I mean, like it literally, like a little jingle, kitty jingle just popped into my head about like how you got to keep trying, you'll get better. And it's that very thing. Like I didn't used to be able to have a conversation like this without turning bright tomato red. I might actually be bright tomato red right now, and I can't tell. But like the more that we're able to practice those things and actually saying the words out loud, like it feels less and less awkward and uncomfortable. And it gives that partner the ability to say, actually, no, I'm not into that. Or, hey, what about this? Like, it's like becomes this mutual, relationship, which I feel like most of us, it's like that's our goal when we get into relationships is to sort of have a partner that's on the same level as us. And we want that equity within our relationships. And so, of course, like we have to practice the actual speaking of it. And then I think just listening too. I think, you know, overall, men folks are really good and and it's not always good, but we're really good at taking up space and doing a lot of the talking, and our needs are really important to us, and so we sort of will take up a lot of that space. And I think that we as masculine people really need to get better at listening, knowing when to be quiet, and like really try to deeply listen and hear from our partner what it is they want from us, or how we can show them love and care in ways that actually like they feel it then, so it's a lot of talking, and I feel like it's uncomfortable and also silly, and also like if we can remember the big why of like why is this important, it's like because violence is happening every day, and mainly women and girls and femme folks and non-binary people are experiencing that. And so if we know that that's happening on the regular in our communities, like we can't just sit silently. We have to actually get into the game.
Thank you, Sean and Nick. And even when these topics are difficult, this is an opportunity to start having those conversations. Just to follow up what you said, Sean, and when you have conversation with your daughters or family members when they want to hug your daughter or kiss her and she doesn't want to. So we're all learning together, when we're having this conversation, and it's a great opportunity to start with our loved ones because there's already a connection there. There's a respect already there. So what better way to start with our loved ones, with our coworkers, people that already know you, that they know you're learning to become a better individual, better man or masculine folks, and to learn how to apply it. And like Nick said, it's not only sexual. Happen when you get in a haircut. It happen when you're talking to your friends. It's something that could be applied to, like I said before, in every aspect of our lives. But it is to be open to learn, to be open to create that safe space, to have those safety boundaries that gonna, allow those future relationships to be more meaningful. I personally think a lot of the cheating and people divorce, and it's because they don't have maybe that communication, healthy communication. And that's not all cases. I'm not a professor, and I'm not a doctor, or anything like that. But I think if the healthier is that communication with your partner, the more understandable they're gonna be when you're going through hard times. That person's gonna have a better idea of how to support you in a way that is needed. To also learn that sometimes when people are talking to you, that you don't necessarily need to have an answer. Maybe sometimes that individual that's talking to you, they just want to talk, get it off the system, and they need someone to listen. So I personally, I feel that I need to have answer for everything, and sometimes it's not. You don't need to, just being there, being supportive, and letting that person know, I'm here for you. I know you're going through a hard time in your relationship, but I'm here to support you. You're not alone, and have a conversation that's meaningful, but at the same time provide those tools to that individual to also be first responder in the future when he, she, or them, or whatever go through that situation, to be able to apply them. So it's super important, and it's something that need to be teach in school, something need to be teach everywhere, and we shouldn't be scared of having this conversation. So uh, let's move on to the next question, unless you have anything else to say, any of you guys.
I was just gonna pop
Yeah,
in. I had a question that came up in my brain, unplanned
yeah.
question. Sorry, y'all. But like, I was one of the another thing I was thinking about is like, so what can we do right now to start working towards the future? Like another thing that we, I think, have to do as men and masculine people is talk with each other and have conversations just like this where we can be like, yo, I've never heard this like what is mutual sexual respect, or like checking in with our buddies, right? Checking in with the guys that are in our lives. Because it's like you think about it starts with you as like an individual, like what we learn, what we want, and what we need, and then how to communicate that. But also like how do we do that? Like I don't think that we're supposed to be doing that in isolation. I think about like when I think about thriving future communities, and even communities in the past that have thrived, and before colonization and all of that. Um, it's like we were never meant to do any of this stuff on our own, or to be isolated trying to figure out all these, like to your point, Felix, like we don't always know what we don't know. And so sitting in a circle of men folks like this, or checking in with your brothers or your buddies at work, and just being like, how's this going for you? Or like, do you, you know, what are your thoughts on consent? Do you feel like you practice it? Like, I don't know what the things are to start that conversation, but, it makes me think about like the whole locker room talk kind of stuff that happens. And it's really easy for us as guys to just like, I don't know, talk about sex in ways where it causes more harm, I think, not only to like the women and femme folks we're talking about, but like we're just modeling that then for the other guys around us. And so, how do you, I said there was a question in here, how would y'all maybe engage with like the guys in your lives? Like, how do you see conversations happening more with other men? Maybe is the question.
No, that's a good point to bring up. And I'm thinking about my own interactions with some friends I have that maybe not necessarily negatively masculine, but overtly masculine, where could be perceived differently. And I think the biggest things in terms of having that conversation is being specific about what you're talking about. First of all, making sure people are comfortable with that conversation, again, because it's tough to have a difficult conversation, but at the same time you don't want to push them away from ever coming back to the table if that's something they didn't want to have in whatever moment you decide to bring it up. But for my thing, it's just like speaking up. um Sometimes I'll be hanging out with friends and they'll say something that's just like very problematic in terms of mutual sexual respect. And I've definitely pushed myself, maybe someone who can at times be shy or introverted, step up and be like, nope, that's where I draw the line. I'm not going to let you say that without, us having this conversation. So unfortunately, sometimes it can be misconstrued again negatively, where you're calling your friends out and just like being like, nope, that's not. If it's truly what I believe in, mutual sexual respect, I think it's actions that you have to take upon yourself if you're in those moments. Or even sometimes I've been the person who, not necessarily always the conversation starter, but brought it up within a group of friends, like, hey, how do you guys feel about mutual sexual respect, or talking about um history, like with relationships, and sometimes when they go good, why did it go good? When they go bad, why did it go bad? And a lot of that always gravitates towards most time mutual sexual respect. And so I guess to answer your question is just like, I don't know. It's an uncomfortable conversation. It's uncomfortable to call your boys out, but sometimes you got to be that person.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nick. How you can have that conversation without also breaking that relationship with your friends. When I have those conversations personally, I try to do it in a way that's not necessarily direct to that person, but sometimes with the scenarios, or how do you feel if your sister is treated that way, or what you feel if your mom, someone do that to your mom, you know, or someone's mom, just so that person doesn't feel that I'm just trying to correct him because obviously I'm not his parent, or whatever. But at the same time, do it with compassion, with love, but at the same time, just to be sure that that person really understand the impact that these have in those loved ones that we have. I personally can share my first sexual relationship. I wasn't ready. She was ready, and I feel the pressure that I have to do it, and I'm totally sure in my face I probably look very scared, but because of the social pressures, I need to do it, so I can then just say, you know what, I'm not virgin anymore, or something like that. So it's those expectations that we have that sometimes even men have, but when there's a female or a female identified person is there with you, and also see that you're not ready, she also needs to say, you know what, maybe this is not the right moment. But it's expectation that sex, especially in those teenager years, that you need to do it in order to become a man is ridiculous, and at the same time, it's not healthy, and it's not fair, because that's something that you're giving away to someone, something that's very private, something that's very personal. And when you open yourself when you're not ready, it could be traumatic in the future, in future relationships. And at the same time, not addressing it at the moment, it's a missed opportunity, for this. And sometimes when we're having the conversations with our friends, sometimes it's just share those stories, those personal stories, and how those stories affect us, and how what we can do in order to be sure that that person also feel comfortable enough of having a conversation with his partner or her partner or whatever, so that person feel comfortable. And but those conversations with your friends are difficult, but they're your friends. I think that's when you realize if that person is your friend, or is just someone that's there, but maybe it's not a friend. So I think yes, it's challenging. I'm not gonna lie to you. Even that I do this work, sometimes I have my barriers, specifically when I have friends that they're very homophobic, or they're very patriarchal in the way that they address themselves and the expectations that they have. But sometimes people are not ready for the change, and it's not up to us to be sure that they make the change, because that's something very personal. But at the same time, it's us to let them know, you know what, this is a tool that you can use to improve your relationship, to improve the way that you're perceived with others. Because we also need to be good role models. We also need to be first responders in some situations, and also understand that sometimes we bring a privilege that men have, and sometimes the society put us in this position that we're just using it to take advantage of it, instead of using it to support our communities. And like Sean said, we don't need to do this by ourselves. We all have our gifts, we have our strengths, that if we can put it together, the impact is going to be bigger. The impact is going to be able to get to those individuals that really need to have these conversations. And sometimes just because we think that it's not a role to say something, we're missing that opportunity. So yes.
And I was just going to jump in here. I know Benjamin was able to join us, and now our tech is just being weird today. So I don't know if you can see Benjamin. I can't. But Benjamin, if you could hear us, if you want to just take a minute to introduce yourself, your name and pronouns, and why you're here, and then we can hop back into our conversation. and maybe it's not going to work. And that's okay. We're being flexible today. So, anyways, Ben, if you can hear us, we're talking right now about how men and masculine people can have conversations with other guys about consent and about mutual sexual respect and how we're practicing that and kind of growing and being healthy together. Felix, I think you're exactly right. I think it's really challenging to have those conversations, especially when it's like you feel like you got to call someone out. Um, and I think, we've talked about that in the past here too, like the difference between calling someone out and calling in, and like the ways that we talk about that, it's like we're not coming from a place where we want to shame our buddy or where we want to make him feel crappy about something he did or said. It's like, no, actually, like I have so many examples where, friends of mine, mostly women and femme folks have called me out and said, hey, I don't know if that's what you meant by that, but this is what we heard. And so it's like, as we learn, as we make mistakes and then learn, then it's like we're passing that knowledge on. And it's not because we think our buddies are jerks or fathers or uncles or whoever, coworkers. It's because we've learned, and we also like can see how we've caused harm in the past, and we don't want that harm to continue on. I think for the most part, we always talk about that, like men are the primary people who are perpetrating violence and harm in our communities. And at the same time, most men don't use violence. So there's a lot of good guys out there who mean well and maybe just haven't learned about how do I practice consent, or like how can I talk about the women in my life in a way that doesn't put them down but like lifts them up. And we're all on this journey of learning. And I see, Ben, you're back here. We're just having this conversation, and I want to give you a minute to introduce yourself as one of the newest faces here at the kitchen table.
Hello. All right. I'm Benjamin. He, him. Been with Mega for nearly 2 months. So here I am.
Glad you're able to join us. We got two of our folks from our mega youth programming here. So yeah, did anyone else have more thoughts though, like about what it feels like or what it can look like for us as guys to have conversations about this with the guys in our lives?
Yeah, I was just gonna add to kind of follow up again with what I've said, what everyone said. It definitely is a difficult, oftentimes uncomfortable conversation, and so to combat the potential for confrontation that it could appear, I definitely feel like you need to come into those discussions with humility, understanding that you're not necessarily the gatekeeper of what mutual sexual respect is. So you're not essentially like lecturing them, but then really just like understanding. We talked about it earlier about listening, and definitely the past couple of relationships I've been in, I've pushed myself, and it's again kind of goes to my everyday now. I like to talk. I'm not sure if that's evident yet. Maybe it will be in future kitchen table conversations, but I've definitely also pushed myself to be mindful about listening. And so that's something that's very important. Even within the conversation like we're having today, it's like I'm looking at everyone's microphone to see who's ready to go off. And even though I want to jump in like right away, it's like, no, you come in those conversations, you listen to your masculine friends, you listen to people where they're coming from, because when you meet them where they're at, you're more likely to make a change with how they uh, address whatever topic. In our case, mutual sexual respect. Because again, yeah, you don't want to push them away. You don't want to be confrontational coming in, calling them out, as opposed to calling them in. You want that to be something where um, everyone's got that equal seat at the table, and they obviously even if it goes against mutual sexual respect, they have their own beliefs and their own agency to listen to me, to not listen to me, and whatnot. And that's obviously, again, you got to respect boundaries in that way too. So
Yeah, well, absolutely. Thank you, Nick. It's interesting because by listening to you, this is something that just happened this week with a friend that I grew up with. We have this messenger chat in Facebook, and there was a good friend of mine that one time he was just publishing a lot of unhealthy stuff on Facebook where he was objectifying women and telling men how to treat women, very obviously unhealthy. And I I felt at that point that I need to say something to him because he's just keep normalizing this type of behavior. They're abusive and they didn't show, consent or mutual sexual respect in a relationship. And he in the beginning he was like, yeah, I know. He has also two daughters, and at the beginning he was yes, but I think he got to a point that he felt that he was triggered probably from the conversation. He also grew up in a relationship where the dad was very abusive of his wife, and he said, he got really upset and started insulting me, and then he just unfriended me from Facebook, and I was like, whoa, what the heck is going on here? We just having a conversation, so I said, you know what, this guy's been publishing a lot of unhealthy stuff, whatever, I'm just gonna block him because I'm totally sure he's gonna come back with the same thing. And this week I was having a conversation with the same group with of friends. He's not in that group, and they mentioned, okay, Felix, hey, he's your friend, Felix, right? And I already knew that maybe he had a conversation with them, and I said, you know what, he is a person that I appreciate, that I care for that people, but uh, is not my friend anymore just because I don't agree with a lot of the things that he said. I don't want my daughters or my family to have to see those unhealthy habits. And from this group that we never had those type of conversation, they say, yeah, Felix, I agree with you. I think he was very narcissist. He was objectified. So it was very refreshing just to see men that we normally don't have this type of conversation, just to start having the conversation. I said, you know what, I agree with you. You don't need to feel bad about not hanging out with him because we noticed those unhealthy habits on them. And but also at the same time, it showed me that even some of the men know that this is unhealthy, and maybe we should have this conversation. They don't have it just because they don't feel comfortable having it. So this is happening everywhere. Doesn't matter the social class, doesn't matter, the color of your skin, where you're from, etc. So it's important to take advantage of those moments, just to brought up, those things that affect us as a society, that affect us as individuals, and take advantage of them because we're learning from it. Even that maybe that person is not gonna change automatically. I'm totally sure the next time he realizes that that person has some of those unhealthy habits, he's gonna say, he's gonna think about it, and maybe he's gonna make them say, you know what, I don't want to do that, or I'm gonna change the topic, or I'm not gonna continue causing harm to individuals in our community. So we're learning that at all times. We need to learn to identify those moments and don't be afraid to have the conversation. So let's take advantage of those are probably small ways to do it, of having this conversation, and some big ways is probably supporting organizations that work or do some work in this type of topic of healthy relationships. Those are the ones that have those tools a lot of the time, that have videos that you can share in social media, and also for us to learn too, if you never had those conversations before, and share with your loved ones. I mean, maybe they're not going to respond, but I'm totally sure a lot of those people, they're going to have the opportunity to maybe watch a little bit of the video and maybe start, thinking about it, and when they're ready to make the change, then they will. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. It's like we're planting seeds and like hoping, like that someone's going to connect with what it is we're saying. And I think you know, as you said, it's like in our friend groups or like in our families, there's already a relationship there. There's already some amount of trust and connection. And so it feels like to me, when I think about like who we can have the most impact on, I think we have to be in relationship with people. Like we can't just be like, hey, dude, being a jerk on Facebook, quit doing that, blah, blah, blah. It's like that person doesn't care who we are, you know, but it's like thinking about who those people are around us. You know, maybe they're really great guys, but every once in a while they, you know, say something sexist or something nasty, and it's like, crap, you know. And so we're noticing that, like those of us who have learned some of these things, it's like we notice it, and then it's, yeah, it's kind of like you have to pick your moment, like where can we plant the seed, and then, you know, like you said, Felix, hopefully we hope, right, that these guys and mask people within our spheres and communities and neighborhoods, like we'll pick that up later. You know, it might not be today, you know, Felix, like with this buddy you're talking about, it's like he maybe wasn't ready to hear that, and you planted that seed, and then, you know, who knows what's going to come up next for him in his life, where he might think, oh shoot, like Felix was telling me about this, maybe I should reach out to him, you know. And so that's something I always think about too, is like we don't actually know how far the ripples go, like after we even just say something like, you know, to a sexist joke, like I don't really get it, you know, or like just some little comment like that can be that first seed planted for someone. And the other thing I was thinking about is like it has taken us, you know, most of us I think are, I guess I don't know how old everyone is in here, but we've had lots of years in our life to learn these really unhealthy and like toxic practices. And so obviously like it makes sense that it's also going to take us time to like not only like change those things, but even start to recognize them within ourselves. And I think, you know, if we're you know, trying to let people know, hey, the reason I'm telling you this is because I learned, or like, you know, helping folks know it's like, I'm not just like calling you on your shit because I think you're a jerk. Like, I'm calling you out because I know that you can do better, and I know that you don't want to keep causing that same harm.
For the record, I'm obviously 20 years old and am not wearing this stocking cap to cover my balding head. But anyways, I was just gonna say, I think it also gets to the part too where you also have to look out for yourself in these kind of moments where you're challenged by friends who say things that you don't agree with. And it's definitely something that as I've gotten older, you start to realize it's like, yeah, I grew up with them. Yeah, they're family or whatever. But you can also establish your own boundaries where if it's someone who, if you can't have that conversation with and you feel like you aren't making that change, I think it's also healthy for you to also be like, well, maybe I just won't. Maybe I needed to be unfriended with him on Facebook because it's just bringing negative energy. Maybe I don't need to hang out with that group of friends because they make me feel uncomfortable and they aren't listening. So I think it's always important to also practice that kind of self-care to make sure that you're handling that out, and not always being a part of that conversation if it affects you negatively.
Yeah, I was going to kind of give some context into my upbringing in a sense. So I see this issue as more of a twofold thing. So in my adopted family, we had a hierarchy system, and unfortunately, in my case, the women were considered a hierarchy, and the men were considered the lowest of the totem pole, as you speak, uh, in my experience. And growing up, the men in my family were often belittled, including me and my brothers. And so, me seeing that growing up, I don't know, it allowed me to see women differently as well as men, right? So I think if we're going to talk about this issue of men and women having respective boundaries towards each other in relationships, friendships, businesses, and all that stuff, I think a lot of times, uh, in my experience, men often get blasted. You may disagree with me, that's fine, you know. But if we are going to hold men accountable, we have to hold women accountable as well. I think it's a symbiotic relationship between the two sexes, right? it's messed up, but like the way in my family they treated us men like dogs, and it changed. It done some damage to me, you know. It attributed to me and not knowing healthy relationships with women. It attributed to me um, not understanding what a feminine woman is, but also it devalued me. I felt as a man growing up. You know, I know my own self worth because of how I was belittled by women, but also not having that healthy male role model companionship as well. So, in a lot of ways, I see it as a complex men and women issue that needs to be addressed because in today's world, there it seems to me there's like a war on men, but we don't talk about the issue of how women sometimes can impact men's behaviors. I'm not justifying what men do. You know, women have their own things too that they can get away with, and a lot of times they're not really held accountable for their behaviors as well, right? So it has to be a twofold thing where both sexes can be looked at, and the behavior they implement either a healthy relationship or a destructive one. So yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I think that what you had to say there, Benjamin, is definitely valuable because it's really easy to say men are all bad, women are all good, and to stick to that really binary way of thinking too, where it's like men and women and all people, right? Because folks identify outside of those two genders as well. And I think, yeah, I think the overall goal when we think about interconnected communities and what it looks like to live in a thriving, connected community, I think all of us are not only taking responsibility and accountability for the ways that we cause harm, we're also responsible for providing care and love and the things that our communities need too. And so I think your perspective is helpful, Benjamin. And I know that we're also running short on time. And so, Felix, do you want to bring us home with our final question for the conversation today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Ben. So, to wrap up this conversation today, let's talk a little bit about what do you feel hopeful about the future and future generations? So, how do you feel hopeful after having this conversation about mutual sexual respect or consent? Are you, hopeful? And I can probably start. I think when think about what I feel hopeful is that future generations are gonna have they're gonna have healthier relationships. They're gonna be able to have conversation. They're gonna be more personal. They're gonna open that opportunity to have more meaningful conversations with your partner. So it's gonna be healthier. It's gonna be healthier. It's not gonna be probably a taboo anymore. So people are gonna have a better understanding of what are self healthy boundaries. What's a healthy relationship. So the relationship are going to be more meaningful. They're going to be relationship that I could believe that will last longer. Even the relationships are not always the same, and sometimes even healthy relationships comes to an end. But that end doesn't need to be one of those ends that you don't talk to each other. That you talk bad about that person. Is a relationship where we're gonna get the best of it, have great memories, but at the same time be able to respect that person. I always been there for that person because obviously you were able to share something personal, so that relationship can continue without jealousy and having those safety boundaries that can make a difference uh, in your life and the people around you. So that's for me what I feel hopeful that is that open that door to a healthy relationship. So yeah.
And with a healthy relationship, it's a happy relationship. And that's why you get into relationships. You get love, you get affection, you get all the things that you feel like you need, and it's things that make your life have more positive outlook knowing that you have someone that you're doing it with. That's what I think about that. Um, my answer for the question about what I'm hopeful for is definitely, and I think Sean E talked about it in the previous recording about how the education is saturated. I think that's such a great thing. The fact that people are going into schools, students are going to college, maybe tech school, wherever they're at in life, and they have a baseline to start. And I feel like that's so different from when I was in school, not having these conversations, not knowing how to necessarily establish healthy boundaries and have discussions about consent. And I feel like with the education not only getting out there, I feel like it's getting better. It's awesome working here at MAP because we get to talk about some of those things, or like Sean's working on the best party model work and kind of going deeper now that we have generations coming up that know this stuff better than we probably did when we were growing up. Um, and with that comes a culture change. I think that's something, again, kind of really tying it together as we talked about how it's uncomfortable discussions to have, but the culture has changed where as I've gotten older, I've been able to have more of those conversations. And they're more prevalent. And so with education getting better, I think the culture is changing. And so I'm hopeful to see where it goes. I think this morning at one of our staff meeting training, we kind of just talked about ebbs and flows. I feel like we're definitely at a good flow right now. I'm really just, I don't know, excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'll say I hope for is that I think now that I'm like what 32 now, I feel I have a better sense of myself on the ways, and I think the ultimate test of life is to master oneself. You know, to always be accountable, to always towards oneself and towards people that you really care about. And now that I have a son, I'm much more adamant about being a better man, a better human, and making healthy choices not only for myself and boundaries, but also like being a better example for my son growing up. Because I didn't have that growing up, and so like I think my goal is to amplify and be a better man. So one day when he's older, he can have that example. So he can carry that to his kids, to his legacy one day, and to one day impact the world, whatever shape it is at that point. But the reality is, the kids are watching us, and we need to do better and seek to do better. Because if we don't, what are we really doing for the future us? So yeah.
I appreciate that a lot too. Yeah, and as a parent, I think it's a unique lens because we're actually seeing that change happen within our kids, and obviously for you guys who work with youth, actually all three of you. I'm the only one here who doesn't work with youth. I'm realizing, but thank you for y'all doing that important work. And I think for me, yeah, I feel hopeful because I'm seeing changes happening already. Like they're happening now. And it's really easy to, I think, feel disappointed or to lose hope because violence obviously is still like at an all-time high. And I feel hopeful because I can see those areas, the way that change is happening, like Sean Elmquist talking about how 10 years ago, it was not the norm for college students to be able to say, yeah, I know what consent is. And now here we are, like delving a little bit deeper into that and like continuing to just build on what we know as like humanity, and so yeah, I think for me, it feels really hopeful that the changes are happening now and that like, as Benjamin said, like we are living it every day, every moment we have the opportunity to like create this shift as our kids are watching, as our friends and all the people around us are as well. And I feel hopeful finally before we wrap up that we don't have to do it alone, that like we're continuing to build a more and more connected community with those around us, and like that feels like there's nothing that is impossible. Like if we all come together as a connected community who's caring about every person in that community, I just think that hope abounds in my brain and in my heart. So I appreciate this conversation with all of you guys, and for those of you who are able to tune in and watch. As a reminder, we hold these conversations every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So join us on March 7th for our next conversation, where we're going to be introducing a new topic for the month of March, and that will be around our spheres of influence. And so, what does that mean? How does that show up in our community? And how can we really practically think about those spheres of influence and how we can create change in our communities? So for that conversation, we're really excited to welcome Katie Carter to join us. Katie is the co-coordinator of the Domestic Violence Restorative Circles program, or DVRC, at Menace Peacemakers, and so we're excited to hear from them about spheres of influence and how that shows up in her life. So don't miss it. And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can stay connected with us on Facebook. You can subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You can also listen to previous conversations on our Spotify or through Podbean. And if you happen to be watching this conversation as part of a virtual training for the Don't Buy It project, you can check out the description below for the instructions about how to download the corresponding discussion and activity guide. And as always, we encourage y'all to have a conversation about this, about mutual sexual respect with the people in your lives. Strike it up at the kitchen table, at the watering tank, at work, wherever, because again, together, we are building interconnected communities that are free from violence, where all of us can thrive. So thank you again for joining us, all of you, and we look forward to being back in a couple of weeks. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you.